Alright, let's just do it. How strong is Yhwach? First off, we're going to have to go through Yhwach's AP scaling, his dimensional tiering, and his speed scaling, and his hacks, of course, the almighty. We'll also have to go through some misconceptions within the Bleach verse, its scaling and everything else, and misconceptions for Yhwach itself to talk about why he's not things like universal. So we'll start off pretty easy with how strong is he in attack potency. Attack potency is basically the equivalent energy he can release. One of Yhwach's most notorious feats, and one of the stronger ones, happens to be his lifting of the Yhwach. Basically, he takes a bunch of parts from the Soul Society and morphs it all together to make the Yhwach territory, which is pretty much just done in like a minute or two. To get this, I basically measured the size of the Yhwach and then used the distance between the Soul Palace and the Serite, which I'll show you how I got to later. Then using 2 time frames, 30 seconds and a minute, I was able to get anywhere from 8 to 32 zetatons, both being small plant plus. So yeah, even the most casual feats from Yhwach tend to be in the planetary ranges roughly. But funnily enough, that's actually the weakest feat I have on this list, so we can go into the other feats to show you why he's far stronger than that. When it comes to the next feat, we'll have to talk about his connection to the Soul King and what the weakened Soul King can produce basically passively. Basically, when we look at something like the Soul Society and its connection to the Soul King's grasp on the Soul Society is really strong. Basically, after Ichigo had slashed it in half, its effect was almost instantly noticeable as it was affecting the whole dimension pretty much. Meaning, and even shown when Mimihagi times it after a second it releases, meaning he should somewhat scale to the energy of what basically affecting the whole dimension, since he's the linchpin is able to stop that so easily and start it when released so easily. Now to figure out this feat, we first have to figure out the size of the Soul Society dimension at minimum. To figure that out, we're going to use Tosen's backstory from the Soul Society arc. Basically, when we look at this panel here, we can clearly see dozens of stars in the sky, but how many are there exactly? So to get a lowball size of the dimension, I basically count all the stars in the sky and I go around 162 stars. But then how many stars can condensely fit in the light years of 3.8 light years per star within this dimension to figure out size? To do this, I basically use the 3.8 minimum light years for stars to figure out the minimum size structure, and then used a cubical structure to further go from there. As you can see, I quite clearly did it on paper, and as you can see, I go around 15 light years for the minimum diameter of the Soul Society. To be clear, that's around 10 times the size of the Solar System. Now you could be asking, wait, that doesn't make much sense, but you got to remember this is a minimum size, not the actual size. It's pretty hard to predict the sizing structure since we don't know what type of stars these are and the gravitational energy they hold. So I had to use red dwarfs and then go for minimum because star structures and constellations aren't really that even in the first place. From here, we apply the most basic version of inverse square law with 1 joule over the whole dimension structure, and we're able to get a result of around 3 times 10 to the 34 joules. For reference, this is around 7.5 yotatons and about large planet level. Now, to tell you how strong this is and make it a little bit more clear, this is well over 100 times the energy needed to destroy Earth. And Yhwach should quite obviously scale to this. Now, remember how I said there was 3 feats? The last feat comes from Memories of Nobody, which is basically the center feat, which involves this energy being released that can push the dimensions back, which the Don guy was able to sustain pretty easily. Now, in Can't Fear Your Own World, it's stated that Yhwach's goal involved removing the boundaries between the 3 worlds, that being Waco Mundo, the Soul Society, and the Living Realm. Now, this would involve part of the Garganta and the Don guy, since that's also a boundary between those worlds. Well, at least between the Soul Society and the Living Realm. Meaning it'd also be plausible to scale Yhwach to this, which using the previously stated dimension sizes, I was able to get around 166 yotatons. For reference, it's around 7 times 10 to the 35 joules. So yeah, mega strong. Now, if you thought that was the end of AP scaling, you're actually wrong. I know what you all want, so let's get into the highball. So as we all know, Rayo acts as an unconscious Kenpaku trading god linchpin of the verse. Now, unlike the soul imbalance, his effects on the Soul Society is almost night instant when thrown off, while these ones are a little bit more passive. This grand effect on the dimensions and the grand demise that comes from its release being so quick, we could definitely scale him somewhat relative to the GBE of the Soul Society at least. So now let's figure out the GBE of the Soul Society. First thing we have to realize is that a lot of these stars, the 162 are likely red dwarfs. Red dwarfs are the most common type of star in our universe, and they're also not that strong. Well, compared to our sun at least. For red dwarfs, we'll use something like Proxima Centauri, the closest red dwarf to us, and on the medium end of sizing for them. From there, we could use the GBE of Proxima Centauri, then multiply that by 162, and then add the GBE energy of the sun. Then once we use something like the radius, which is 7.5 light years, we're able to get GBE of around 5 times 10 to the 42, which is around low solar system level. Now, wait a minute. Of course, as you know, VSBW and other things have it at around 44 for solar system level, but I can explain what the difference is. A lot of those things use the inverse square law energy medium, which is sure what would happen more often, but that's definitely not the minimum for solar system level. There have been graduate school papers by astrophysicists that get around 240 tetatons, which is not much past basically the sun's GBE. And this is about several times that energy. Now, to end the GBE versus inverse square law for minimum energy debate, realistically, GBE makes more sense since GBE is literally the minimum energy needed to destroy a celestial body or star system. Like, NASA agrees with that. Now, do I agree with this? Like, not really, like, kinda. Realistically, it's really plausible. The problem is that it's not very quantifiable, which is my problem. I can't really quantify it, so I can't say an exact number, so I don't really want to go with this end. But if you take this end, I'm not going to say you're wrong, since it's a very plausible way of looking at the energy amount. So yeah, I wouldn't call you illogical or dumb if you said that he's around solar system level. But me personally, I'd probably side more with large planet. Now let's go through a few arguments that are made that I don't agree with for things like universal galaxy level. The first one, of course, being the Gremmy argument and Gremmy scaling. Now, in all fairness, this deserves a whole video within itself, but let's talk about it pretty briefly. I take a big issue in general when applying naturalistic sizes to man-made dimensions when there's no gravitational need for it. A big reason why stars and all that are the size they are is because of the gravitational systems within universes and how tight the gravity is. That is why stars are as far away as they are and as big as they are. The man-made dimensions don't need to follow this since they're not making things like that, and they don't need to follow the same gravitational needs, especially since Grammys doesn't show that at all. On top of that, do you know how many things we'd have to say that big? Every time space in history could be easily argued to be a universe in size just off the fact of the matter that's a time space, since no other time space is shown to be smaller in real life. But the beauty of this is that stars can be smaller. Scientists in Wisconsin have made synthetic stars that are able to produce solar winds, have high amounts of gravities, and are the size of humans. So this isn't a huge requirement. Now, the big bullet we have to bite to say that Grammy's dimension is the size of a galaxy is things like Dagon's dimension being the size of like a small solar system, and Kagi's time space itself being the size of a universe. These all things would run the same way because we'd have to apply naturalistic sizings to everything. Since in reality, there's no scientific or logical need for these to be that size, nor is there a statement that supports these sizes. Next, Grimmjow. At the start of Can't Fear Your Own World Part 1, we know Ichibei states that if Grimmjow was to release his energy, he could potentially cause the three worlds to collapse as they currently stand in. But a little bit of context is left out. He says, as it currently stands, referring to the fact that Rayo had not fully come back into place since the old Rayo is gone and Yhwach is gone. There isn't a good linchpin in place, so the worlds are currently off balance, especially since a bunch of hollows had died in the past due to the Waco Mundo situation. The world's balance is already thrown off. That's also sent 1,000-year blood war. Also, throwing off the balance isn't the equivalent of destroying these dimensions, since we know the fine line balance is really strict. We know this is the case because we know the Quincy's, even though they were just killing hollows, was able to throw it off enough to cause the destruction of the universe potentially. So yeah, it definitely doesn't refer to the idea of him being able to destroy them. That's not the same thing. Alright, now to the last part being Muken. Okay, yes, in the manga, even in the rules, it stated Muken is infinite. But there's a few problems with this. Okay, first off, if it's within the Serite, then it can't be infinite, because the Serite has circumference. It takes 10 days to walk to each gate based off the statements from Yoruichi. Now, this is the case it can't be infinite because the Serite has circumference, and circumference means it has end. An infinitely sized structure can't have curvature, so it can't have a circumference. That means it has some sort of end. By an interpretation too, we could take the fact that in the 13 Blades Dad book, it is stated infinite, but it also is stated to be a separate space, meaning it wouldn't scale to the Soul Society's size as it's a completely separate space. So in conclusion, the Soul Society wouldn't gain any extra sizing off it, so the Soul Society can't be infinite. Now let's talk about speed. Okay, so when we're talking about speed, we have to figure out the distance between the Soul Palace to the Serite. Now how do we figure this out? We can't really apply human walking speed since he's not walking, and we can't really apply any like extrinsic calculable speed because that'd be calc stacking. But special thanks to Favor for this method. What if we applied freefall? To be more specific, we'll use this formula here. And with this, we're able to figure out how far Ichigo traveled within 8 hours based on the fact that the Soul Palace seemingly has similar gravity to us. Or the Serite, which seemingly has similar gravity to us. Now, using that, we're able to get around 5.4 billion meters. Now, for people that think that's insane, you gotta remember, even falling from things like the Eiffel Tower only take about 8 seconds to hit the ground from. From high distances, people tend to fall really fast. But now, let's apply Yhwach's one time where he shot something down there that wasn't the Oshwala. We see Yhwach shoots Black Aura all the way down to the Serite. This is just judging off the fact that it was really quick and it only took around 3 pages to get down there. So that was around 3.6 times the speed of light, judging by the 5-second time frame. That's super fast, and that's not even everything. Mimihagi has a similar feat where he flies up in around 3 pages, so we use 5 seconds again, and that's also 3.6 times the speed of light. And mind you, we see Yhwach blitz the shit out of Mimihagi, or at the very least showed relativity to him before he even absorbed Soul King powers. So no matter what way you cut it, Yhwach is 100% FTL to FTL plus. Now before you bring up something involving like the Sarah or something like that, I have a video dropping tomorrow which involves me explaining how light works and me explaining why I don't think things like Sarah and the Negacion work like light, which would deny their speed bases or put their speed bases into question. Now finally, onto the last part of this video, the Almighty, and why it's way stronger than you think. To explain pretty simply, Yhwach explains his ability, the Almighty, to be like viewing all possible timelines and all possible conclusions of the future as grains of sand. Now, as you can see, he can then pick which one he wants to be the case. Like, for instance, he wanted Ichigo's Bankai to be dead and destroyed, so he picked a timeline where the Bankai broke. This is further backed up by when Ichigo replies, he says there's no way Yhwach could have moved. It's as if it was done without him moving, which is what the Almighty does. He's able to pick times where things get destroyed and can alter reality doing it. Now, why is that so insane? Because it's fourth dimensional. Now, I'll have to explain why that's fourth dimensional for a second. Let's look at what he did. Okay, so his alterings on time alters reality itself. Now, we have 4 coordinates within our universe that we can see, which is the first, second, and third dimension, length, width, and height, and then there's time, which is also a coordinate. So he functionally and universally interacts and chooses the path that coordinate runs on, and then further, that is such a strong effect on reality that breaks things that he's not even interacting with himself. That's pretty fourth dimensional if you ask me. And definitely an interaction with the universe that doesn't seem possible for a 3-dimensional being. Now, I better stop myself before people get ahead. This does not make Yhwach measurable speed or uni plus. As being 4D in this instance doesn't give you any sense of extra volume or anything along those lines to say he could be stronger than that at these levels, as the fourth dimension of time doesn't really interact with sizing, which is what we tend to draw the ideas of being high dimensional making you stronger from. As much as time is a spatial dimension, it's not a spatial dimension in the same way that those others are. Now let's look at this fourth dimensional existence as a spectrum, similar like the 3-dimensional existence. Sure, I might be able to destroy a brick, but I can't destroy a mountain. I can't go to the upper limits of a 3-dimensional being. Same with Yhwach. Yhwach may not be able to go to the upper echelons either, as he's shown nothing that implies he has a measurable speed. If anything, how long it takes him to travel certain places like the 3 pages to get all the way down there would imply the opposite, as everything he does seemingly has a time too. So yeah, I would definitely not call him a measurable speed or uni plus, but I would definitely follow the idea that he has some level of fourth dimensional existence with the Almighty, as he can interact with time way more externally than 3-dimensional beings can, which also makes his ability insane.